Keanu Reeves walked through the narrow streets of New Orleans, keeping his head low under the brim of his baseball cap. The warm night air carried the scent of fresh bread, spices, and something else: music. Jazz drifted from the dimly lit bars, filling the streets with its soft, hypnotic rhythm. The city was alive, buzzing with energy, yet it also held a quiet mystery in its cobblestone alleys. Keanu had come to Louisiana for a film event, but the flashing cameras and red carpets didn't interest him. He had been in the spotlight for so long that he had learned to appreciate the smaller, simpler moments. Moments when he could just observe the world without being observed. Tonight, he wasn't looking for anything fancy. No five-star restaurant, no VIP treatment. He just wanted a good meal in a quiet place where no one would recognize him. That's when he saw it. A small restaurant tucked between two larger buildings, almost hidden. There were no bright signs, no lines of people waiting outside. Just warm, golden light spilling through the windows and the soft sound of silverware clinking against plates. It looked like the kind of place only locals knew about. Curious, Keanu pushed open the wooden door and stepped inside. The restaurant was cozy and rustic. The wooden tables were old and slightly worn, their edges smoothed by years of use. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty wine bottles and small trinkets. Candles flickered on each table, casting a golden glow that made the entire space feel warm and inviting. The smell of slow-cooked Creole food filled the air, making his stomach growl softly. Keanu chose a table in the far corner, away from the entrance. A middle-aged waiter approached him, wearing a friendly smile. He handed Keanu a menu without any sign of recognition. Perfect. Keanu ordered a simple plate of jambalaya and a glass of wine, wanting nothing more than to enjoy a peaceful meal, surrounded by the gentle hum of conversation and the soft rhythm of the night. As he waited for his food, he let his eyes wander. The restaurant was busy but peaceful. Couples leaned in close, whispering to each other over candlelight. A group of friends laughed together, sharing plates of food. At a nearby table, a woman scribbled furiously in a worn notebook, lost in her own world. Keanu exhaled slowly, feeling himself relax for the first time in what felt like forever. But then something changed. It started softly, so softly that he almost didn't notice it at first. A sound floating gently through the air like a whisper. Keanu lifted his head. In the far corner of the restaurant, a small stage had been set up. Nothing fancy, just a stool, a microphone, and an old speaker. And standing there, gripping the microphone with both hands, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 13 years old. Yet there was something about her presence, something larger than life. Her eyes were closed, her brows slightly furrowed, as if she were holding on to something no one else could see. Then she sang. Her voice was not just beautiful, it was haunting. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. There was something in the way she sang, something raw and powerful. Each note carried a story, an emotion that felt too deep for someone so young. The restaurant went silent. Conversations faded. Forks were set down. The only thing that remained was her voice, weaving through the air like a ghost. Keanu felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard incredible singers before. He had seen performances that moved crowds to tears. But this was different. She held onto the microphone as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. There was no nervousness, no hesitation, only emotion, pure and unfiltered. And that emotion, it felt like a cry for help. The song came to an end, and for a moment, the room remained suspended in silence. Then slowly a ripple of applause began. It started hesitantly, then grew louder, stronger, filled with real admiration. The girl opened her eyes and offered a small, shy smile before stepping down from the stage. She moved carefully through the restaurant, carrying a small donation box in her hands. Keanu watched her closely. Something inside him stirred. That voice, that pain in her melody, it wasn't just a performance. It was real. But why? Even as the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, conversations picking up again, silverware clinking against plates, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling. Who was she? And why did her voice sound so full of sorrow? He watched as she moved between tables, politely accepting crumpled bills and loose change in her small donation box. Some people gave generously, pressing folded bills into her hands with kind smiles. Others barely looked at her, tossing in coins without a second thought. She accepted everything the same way, with quiet gratitude. Keanu flagged down the waiter. "Who is she?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The waiter glanced toward the girl and sighed. "That's Lila. She sings here most nights." Keanu studied her again. She was young, too young to be working like this. Yet, she carried herself with quiet determination, like someone who had no choice but to grow up too soon. She doesn't get paid? Keanu asked. The waiter shook his head. Nope. She sings for donations. Keanu frowned. Why? The waiter hesitated, then leaned in slightly, his voice softer now. She's trying to save money for her grandfather's surgery. Keanu felt a pang in his chest. She does this every night? He asked. The waiter nodded. Almost every night. She's been coming here for months. Some of the regulars give what they can, but it's never much. He sighed, his expression troubled. Her grandfather, Marco, used to be a well-known craftsman. Restored a lot of the old buildings in town. But now he's sick. Needs surgery but refuses to accept charity. Keanu's grip on his glass tightened. The pieces were starting to come together. Lila wasn't just a girl with a beautiful voice. She was a child fighting against fate, carrying a burden too heavy for her small shoulders. And her grandfather? He was a man trapped by his own pride and helplessness. Keanu exhaled, staring down at the wine swirling in his glass. He knew that pain. The pain of wanting to help someone you love, yet feeling powerless to change their fate. He had felt it before. And he couldn't just walk away now. Across the restaurant, Lila continued collecting donations. Some people gave generously. Others barely looked at her. But she accepted everything the same way, always saying, "Thank you." When she reached Keanu's table, she stopped. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her bright, intelligent eyes. She didn't immediately recognize him. To her, he was just another stranger in a city full of faces. Keanu pulled out his wallet. He didn't want to overwhelm her with an absurd amount of money, not yet. Instead, he placed a $100 bill into the donation box. Lila's eyes widened. "Sir, this is too much," she said softly. Keanu smiled gently. "Consider it a tip." She hesitated, looking down at the money, then back up at him. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was so different now, soft, almost fragile. Nothing like the powerful force that had filled the room moments ago. Keanu hesitated before asking, "How is your grandfather?" Lila blinked, surprised. Most people didn't ask. They just gave money and moved on. She bit her lip, gripping the donation box a little tighter. He's doing his best," she said carefully. But Keanu heard what she wasn't saying. Lila was scared. No matter how much she sang, no matter how much money she raised, she was afraid it wouldn't be enough. Keanu nodded because he understood. He watched Lila as she walked away. There was something in her voice that touched his heart, something that felt familiar to him. He knew this story wasn't over. Keanu sat quietly, watching Lila move through the restaurant. She was young, but she carried a heavy burden, like someone who had been through too much. He traced the rim of his wine glass, thinking about her song. The way her voice almost broke, not because she was weak, but because she felt every word deeply. The more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just about money. Lila wasn't just singing to collect donations. She was holding on to something, someone, before time ran out. And Keanu couldn't ignore that. As she passed by his table again, Keanu gently raised a hand. "Lila." She stopped, surprised. Most people didn't remember her name. They just gave her money and moved on. But this man was different. He wasn't just impressed by her singing, he saw something deeper. Something she wasn't sure she wanted anyone to see. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Yes." Keanu smiled softly and pointed to the empty chair across from him. "Sit with me for a minute." Lila looked around, unsure. She was supposed to keep collecting money before heading home. But something about this man, his kindness, his patience, made her pull out the chair and sit down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Keanu let her breathe. Then he asked, "How's your grandfather?" "Really?" Lila's fingers gripped the edge of the table. "I told you he's doing his best," she said, forcing a smile. Keanu didn't look away. He waited, the way people do when they actually care about the answer. Lila's smile faded. She sighed and looked down at the small donation box in her lap. "He's getting worse," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "You already knew." Lila swallowed hard. "He keeps saying he doesn't want to be a burden." Her small hands clenched into fists. "He doesn't want me doing this, singing for money? But what else can I do?" Her voice cracked with desperation. Keanu felt something deep in his chest tighten. He knew this feeling. The feeling of watching someone you love slip away and knowing that no matter how hard you fight, it might not be enough. But he also knew something else. She shouldn't have to fight alone. Lila quickly wiped her eyes, embarrassed. "Sorry? I don't usually talk about this." Keanu shook his head. "You don't have to apologize." Lila looked at him, really looked at him. You understand, don't you? He nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. She waited, expecting him to say more. But he didn't. Because some pain doesn't need words. After a moment, she straightened up, pushing away her emotions. I just have to keep going. I have to make sure we get enough. Keanu studied her. This girl, this warrior in disguise, fighting a battle most adults couldn't handle. A part of him wanted to fix everything. He wanted to take out his wallet and give her enough money to pay for every hospital bill so she wouldn't have to worry anymore. But he knew better. If her grandfather was anything like she said, he wouldn't accept a stranger's money. And Lila, she wasn't just fighting for his life. She was fighting for his dignity. Keanu couldn't just give her a solution. He had to find another way. As Lila stood up to leave, something about her voice stayed with him. Something that reminded him too much of his own past. And that's when he knew this story wasn't over. The next morning, Keanu stood in front of an old apartment building on the edge of New Orleans. It wasn't falling apart, but it had seen better days. Rusted balconies, faded paint, a place full of people with big dreams who now lived with what they had. Lila had mentioned apartment 3B. Keanu adjusted the strap of his bag and climbed the stairs. He thought about the man he was about to meet, proud, stubborn. A man who had built a life with his own hands, only to have those hands fail him now. He knocked. Silence. Then slow footsteps. The door creaked open. Giovanni stood there, thin but strong, his back slightly hunched. His salt and pepper hair framed a face full of years. His sharp eyes studied Keanu with suspicion. Can I help you? Keanu smiled gently. Hi, I'm Keanu. I heard about your work, your restorations. I wanted to meet you. Giovanni frowned. My work. Keanu nodded. Restoring history, that's an art. Giovanni rubbed his chin. That was a long time ago. But you still remember it. Pause. Then, reluctantly, Giovanni stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was small but neat. Wooden furniture, old photos, hand-carved trinkets. Keanu's eyes landed on a workbench in the corner, cluttered with unfinished wooden pieces. Giovanni was still creating. Coffee? Giovanni asked gruffly. Sure. As it brewed, Giovanni eyed him. What's a man like you doing here? Keanu smiled. I met Lila last night. Giovanni's face hardened. She shouldn't be singing in those restaurants, he muttered. She should be living her life, not? He stopped, shaking his head. I never wanted this for her. Keanu leaned forward. She's doing it because she loves you. Giovanni scoffed. That's the problem. He took a sip of coffee. She thinks if she works hard enough, she can fix things. That she can fight the inevitable. His voice dropped. But I won't let her waste her life trying to save me. Keanu chose his words carefully. You taught her to be strong. Giovanni looked up. But strength isn't just about fighting alone. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let people fight with you. Something flickered in Giovanni's eyes, recognition. Then just as quickly it was gone. I don't take handouts, he said firmly. Keanu smiled, reaching into his bag. Good. Because I didn't bring one. He placed a small wooden box on the table. Giovanni frowned. What's this? Something I found in an antique store. It reminded me of your work. Cautiously, Giovanni picked it up, running his fingers over the smooth wood. He recognized the craftsmanship instantly. For a moment, he seemed lost in it. Keanu watched as his expression softened. You're an artist, Keanu said gently. And the world still needs artists. Giovanni looked up. His eyes were tired, but not defeated. For the first time in a long time, his hands didn't feel weak. They felt like they could still create. Keanu left Giovanni's apartment with a new idea. The old man was too proud to take money. But Keanu had seen something in his eyes, just for a moment, a flicker of life. This wasn't about giving Giovanni something. It was about restoring what he had already built. Scrolling through his phone, Keanu found the right contact and pressed call. Didn't expect to hear from you in New Orleans, a familiar voice answered. Keanu smiled. I have a proposition for you. 2 days later, Keanu stood inside the historic Orpheum Theater. It was one of the oldest theaters in New Orleans. Legends had performed here. Tonight it will host Lila. And tonight, everything will change. Keanu had planned everything in secret. No news, no big announcements, just one special night. The theater owner agreed right away. I can fill the seats, he said. You just need to make sure she sings. That was the hard part. Lila would say no if she knew too much. Her grandfather, Marco, wouldn't accept a gift. But what if this wasn't a gift? What if it was a way to show how talented she was? That evening, Keanu met Lila outside the restaurant where she always sang. "You came back," Lila said, surprised. Keanu nodded. "I have a question." She tilted her head. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "If you had the chance to sing for people who came just to hear you, would you?" Lila hesitated. "I don't know," she said, glancing at the small donation box she carried every night. "I'm not a real singer. I just do this because I have to." Keanu shook his head. "No. You do it because it's inside you." Lila bit her lip. She had sung for so long just to survive that she forgot what it felt like to sing for joy. Keanu pulled out a ticket and handed it to her. "For tomorrow night. Just come and watch. That's all I ask." Lila looked at the ticket, confused. "But why?" Keanu smiled. "Because I think you'll see something you didn't expect." Keanu went to Marco's small apartment. "You again?" the old man muttered. Keanu smirked. "I don't give up that easily." He placed a piece of wood on the table. Marco frowned. "What's this?" "A job," Keanu said. "A theater downtown needs someone to fix its old wooden walls. They need a real expert." Marco scoffed. "And you thought of me?" Keanu shrugged. "Your work is famous." Marco ran his fingers over the wood. Something changed in his eyes. "Just come see the place," Keanu said. "If you don't want to do it, you can walk away." Marco exhaled. "Fine. I'll go." That evening, the Orem Theater was full. Keanu stood backstage, watching as strangers, locals, and musicians filled the seats. They had all heard whispers about a girl with a voice that could stop time. Lila arrived with Marco. Her eyes widened as she looked around. "This is," she trailed off, overwhelmed. Keanu smiled. "Something different." Meanwhile, Marco ran his hand over the wooden walls. "Someone restored this," he muttered. Keanu nodded. "Yeah, and they need someone to take care of it." Marco eyed him. "Are you serious?" "Completely." Something in the old man shifted. Maybe this wasn't charity. Maybe this was a chance. Lila was still staring at the stage when the theater owner walked up. "You must be Lila," he said. She nodded, confused. He smiled. "We'd love to hear you sing tonight." Lila's eyes widened. "What?" He gestured to the crowd. "They came for you." Lila froze. I can't do this," she whispered. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This isn't about money." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Then what is it about?" Keanu smiled. "It's about you." The lights dimmed. The audience hushed. Lila stepped toward the microphone. Her heart pounded. Her hands shook. She wasn't ready. She had always sung to survive, to take care of her grandfather. But this was different. She turned to Keanu, panic in her eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered. Keanu knelt beside her, his voice calm. "You don't have to. But if you don't, you might always wonder, what if?" Lila took a shaky breath. This wasn't about money. It was about believing in herself. The theater fell silent as Keanu sat at the grand piano. His fingers pressed the keys, playing a melody that felt like home. Lila closed her eyes. Then she sang. At first her voice was soft, unsure. But as she let go and felt the music, it grew stronger, richer. She sang with all the emotions she had hidden for years. The audience leaned in, completely mesmerized. This wasn't just a performance. This was her truth. As the last note faded, the room was silent. Then thunderous applause. A standing ovation. Lila stood frozen, staring at the cheering crowd. They weren't clapping out of pity. They had really heard her. For the first time she felt seen. From the side of the stage, Marco watched, his hands shaking. But this time it wasn't from illness. It was from emotion. For so long he had pushed Lila away, thinking he was protecting her. But she had never been a burden. She had been becoming. Lila met his gaze, tears in her eyes. "I'll do the surgery," Marco said softly. A sob escaped her lips as she ran to him, wrapping her arms around him. She had been fighting for so long. Now she could finally breathe. The theater owner stepped onto the stage, smiling. "Thanks to the generosity of this wonderful community, we've raised enough money for Marco's surgery." The crowd cheered again. But Lila barely heard it. This wasn't just about saving her grandfather. It was about changing everything. As the applause rang out, Keanu knew something special had happened tonight. Because sometimes the most important moments in life aren't just about surviving. They're about becoming the person you were always meant to be. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.